Hi guys, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Investor Intelligence, brought to you by the team at the Property Mentors. It's your weekly podcast for all things investment and hosted by me, Phoebe Sikowski-Wallace. Today's episode is part 2 from my chat with Simon Kuestenmacher, who again is one of Australia's leading demographers and the co-founder and director of the demographics group based here in Melbourne. So in last week's episode, Simon talked in depth about the first half of his 22 predictions for 2022. We've received such great feedback from that episode. We've even had a few listeners say they were left wanting more of Simon's predictions. If you haven't already, go back and listen to that episode, as all these predictions are based off plenty of data and plenty of research, and it was just so insightful. But let's get straight back into them. This is part 2 of Simon's 22 predictions for 2022. So number 12, the healthcare sector continues to boom.
That's almost cheating. It's a terribly easy prediction to make.
That's right.
We are going to continue to age at a high pace, and we are going to continue to be a rich country that can afford to grow old. Plus, we do live in a pandemic. The one booming sector in a pandemic is the healthcare sector. So money will be thrown at the healthcare sector left, right, and center. So it's a very obvious prediction, this one.
Quite self-explanatory, yes. So number 13, you say, while Australia will recover economically in 2022, a near universal skills shortage will hold back economic growth. So what are you talking about here?
Well, we are a migrant economy that long operated on a skilled migration list that essentially guaranteed that we can order in skilled work, whenever we want. It's a bit like Uber Eats for the economy. You order it on the app and then it gets delivered to your doorstep. That doesn't quite work. If we right now want a skilled engineer, we need to cook or bake the engineer ourselves, and that usually takes a couple of years, and then you only got a junior engineer. So that is difficult, and therefore you will see lots of policies trying to mitigate the staff shortage. The first and obvious one is that we will try to get people into the country as soon as we can do so safely. Well, in the meantime, we can try to encourage young moms to come back from parental leave sooner rather than later. We can try to convince older workers to not go into retirement, to still stay connected to the workforce a bit longer. But the workforce that is currently employed, they will carry the burden of just working longer hours in a business. If the business were usually to hire 1 or 2 more people, this work that is there usually still gets done by someone up to a certain degree. And that's what I would predict. I would predict that whoever you are in employment at the moment, you will work longer hours in 2022.
So we're going to be seeing maybe existing staff working longer hours. Do you think that means we're going to see another big wave of burnout?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. So it becomes a challenge to manage the higher demands from your work. And you would just from sheer egotistical necessity, you would barrack for borders to be open rather quickly, so you get enough new colleagues to pick up your work.
Of course, yes, that makes sense. So 14, more retail spending will take place online.
Yeah, so we've seen this during the pandemic that new habits formed. Before the pandemic started, we had about 6.6% of all retail taking place online, and that then shot up to about 11% at the first wave of lockdowns. That doesn't sound all that dramatic, 5% increase, but remember that every percentage point increase is about $7.5 billion that is not being spent in a brick and mortar store, but is being spent online. That was only during the lockdowns. So you can say, well, let's say 2022 won't see any lockdowns. So surely this will go back. Yes, it will go back, but it will not go back to what we would have seen previously, to the 6 or 7% that we expected. We've seen this at the start, at the Christmas Christmas 2020, 2021, then there were no lockdowns. Australia was open. And instead of being at 11%, we were at about 9%. So that means we permanently created new habits of 2 percentage points of retail shifted from brick and mortar to online. So that is about $15 billion that are not being spent in a brick and mortar store, but that are being spent online. For many products that they don't care where you buy their product, but it does worry the brick and mortar stores. It does worry your local main street where you are probably going to see more vacant stores. And that is a catastrophe. If your local main street has empty stores, every store owner, their local business council, their local government, they need to come together to find a solution for this. This is the first sign of the death of a local main street. You need to fill those stores. You need to fill those stores with meaningful stuff. Ideally, you can put a decent business in. Maybe you can't. Then you need to get creative. So, just make it into a ball pit. Be creative. A mini library. Free mini co-working spaces to encourage local activity in the next coffee shop or whatever. Avoid empty storefronts at all costs. It is absolutely crucial for the survival of your storefront. If you are a business owner and a store in your street is closed, this is a nightmare in the making. Don't think this means more business for you. The opposite is the case. Work together as a main street. Work closely with your local council or business associations. This must be avoided, and this is likely going to be, getting a more severe issue around Australia.
Okay, so it's a bit of a domino effect with that one. Do you think we're going to see more stores close rather than make the move to online permanently? Because I feel like a lot of store owners would find the sort of technology side of everything just too hard.
Well, that as a local store on a main street, you don't need to become the next Amazon or online retailer. You need to be a destination. And so you need to attract, a main street needs to attract people. That are about there. And so you do need a mix of nice cafes. You need to have a mix of good shops, of fresh produce, of a couple. It's like a mall. You need a couple of anchor stores so that people have a reason to go to the main street. If one store closes, one reason to go to the main street disappeared. And then everyone else suffers along with this. Yeah,
okay. No, I can see how that's a problem for sure. So this is an interesting one. There will be no coronavirus baby boom.
There absolutely won't. At the start of the pandemic, there were lots of little articles written that said, there'll be a big lockdown, and then 9 months after this, we will see this big corona baby boom. As if the only thing we could think of in lockdown was to procreate. The opposite actually was the case. We had fewer rather than more babies.
Okay.
And if you are the parent of 1 or 2 kids, you wouldn't be surprised that you didn't feel the need to add a second or third kid, if you went through months of homeschooling. But as a demographer, this data doesn't come as a surprise. Simply because in times of economic uncertainty, in times of historic pandemics, people always had fewer rather than more births. Plus, it feeds into the general trend of lower birth rates that we saw. So it's a continuation of an existing trend that has been supercharged by the pandemic.
Interesting. Do you know what the birth rate or the fertility rate was beforehand?
We had 1.66 before that. So the idea is, with the fertility rate, we say that a fertility rate of 2.1 means the replacement rate. Then a population, assuming there's no migration, remains stable because a couple of people die. So a couple, mom and dad, they don't need to have 2 kids, but 2.1 kids to make sure the population stays stable. Most of the industrialized world has birth rates well below 2. In Europe, no country reaches 2, not a single one. So Europe is shrinking, for example. And Europe isn't pursuing a strong migration strategy as Australia is. So Australia can grow because we have migration. Without migration, for the last 2 years, we still grew, but only because we didn't have many people dying. And that can't last forever. So just from a demographic profile, we are very blessed in having the millennials being the biggest generation. So you have a generation that is of working age, that is of the oldest millennial is going to be 40 this year.
Yeah.
And they're just about to reach the highest spending phase of the life cycle, because there's no other point in your life than when you're 42 where you're spending as much money. At 42, you already had a couple of promotions at work. Your incomes are nice and high. You have 1.7 hungry kids at home. And every penny, you have a big fat mortgage. Every penny that you earn goes straight out the door back into the economy. It's bad news for you, but it's great news for the economy. So that really is what the millennials will be facing or will be creating over the next decade.
If you wanted to get fit or start a fitness program, you wouldn't run a marathon if you hadn't yet mastered jogging. You also wouldn't begin weight training by lifting 30-kilo dumbbells. There are, of course, multiple ways to keep fit through a variety of sports and exercise programs. However, there is a process to getting into shape and achieving peak performance. It's the same when it comes to investing in property. You need to start by doing some self-assessment of where you are now to where you'd like to be. This would be your fitness test. You have to find your team of experts who will help you along the way. These would be your trainers. And learn how other people invest, including the mistakes they've made. Only then can you start to look at how you will achieve your property investing goals. Property Fit assists you with all of this. It's the latest book from experienced property investor, entrepreneur, and founder and CEO of the Property Mentors, Luke Harris. It's the book that will guide you through the groundwork you need to cover before you start investing, exploring all the ways to invest in property by helping you find a strategy that will lead to the ultimate goal of financial freedom. Property Fit is your easy-to-read, practical book including mentor tips and mindset insights, as well as proven strategies that seasoned investors or those just starting out in property will find invaluable. Visit propertyfitbook.com.au to purchase your copy and get your property portfolio in shape for financial freedom. So number 16 is somewhat related but not quite. So women will return to work within a year of childbirth in high numbers. So what does that mean for things like childcare and...
There is, so that trend has been happening already, is that women return to work sooner rather than later. That is because they're more, they're more invested into attractive careers, into attractive jobs. These are careers where spending time in the job actually means you earn more money. It's not like a unskilled job where whatever, if you are away for 1 year or for 4 years, for 5 years, and you still then earn the same amount of money. That would be the case, for example, for a supermarket cashier. But if you work in a knowledge job, you do know that every year that you spend in the workforce actually creates more income. So you want to minimize the time away from work, at least from an economic perspective. And so therefore, I can say that the demand for childcare will even grow despite having fewer kids, adding fewer kids to the population, simply because moms are returning to work sooner and in higher numbers. That, of course, leads me to, this is not my predictions, but this is just me yapping on about one of my favorite issues, that we do need universal free childcare in Australia.
Yes.
To ensure that, particularly now with the skills shortage, we want to make sure that those women that choose to go back to work, that they can.
Yeah.
And that they don't need to make economic decisions whether it's actually worth it financially going back to work, let alone, so you make a pure financial decision. You don't even start considering the benefits for your child. Is my child better with me? Is my child better in childcare? Whatever it is, those things don't even feature at the primary decision. The primary decisions: can we afford to go back to work? Can we afford to put the kid into childcare or not? And really, if you want to help millennials, if you want to make housing more affordable, don't waste your money on stupid stuff like first homebuyer grants. Make childcare free for everyone, unconditionally, period.
Yeah, childcare has always been a bit of a joke, to be honest. But number 17, this is I don't know if this is a positive one, but you'll talk me through it. The world will praise Australia for its handling of COVID.
Yep, so the idea is that if we Australians, we talk about how have we handled COVID, it's very easy to say, we've suffered, we through a horrible lockdown, these restrictions were too hard. Maybe those folks in WA say, thank God we've been locked away from all the other incompetent states. Whatever it is, there's a lot of negative talk about how we as Australians, how the government, how another state handled COVID. So the narrative about the management of COVID is actually fairly negative in Australia. The world, in the long run, once the pandemic is actually over, will judge the performance of each country on a couple of very simplistic measurements. The first measurement will be deaths per million people. How many people died? And Australia has done amazing in this measurement. We saved people from dying. People in the US died at, I think, 40 times the rate than they died in Australia from COVID. That is insane. That is a huge success. On this death management thing, we nailed it. So that will work in our favor because the world will not care whether we liked our lockdowns or we didn't. The other measurement would be the vaccination rate. How successfully did we manage to get our population along on the ride to ensuring that everyone is safe. And we currently have a very high vaccination rate. I assume that this vaccination rate will also continue to be very high as we start vaccinating younger and younger populations. We are right now facing the challenge of making sure that everyone gets boosted. And we're doing all these things actually really well. And so I think if you look at just this data set for the 200 countries that are on this planet, Australia will be among the top 20 countries. So we will be one of the, I don't want to say winners of the pandemic, but we will be viewed as a successful handler of the pandemic.
Do you think there's a part of it, though, that people kind of forget that considering we're such a large country land-wise, but we have quite a tiny population compared to our landmass. Do you think that plays into it a little bit?
Well, so the geography of Australia made it easy to lock a state down, to manage this on a state-by-state basis, simply because each state looks the same. You have a big fat capital city and you have up to a handful of sizable regional cities, and that's it. And that's much easier than the situation in Germany, where sure there are 16 different states in Germany, but they all grow into each other. There isn't much empty space between the states. People flow much more between states than they are doing here. So any kind of state-based management of a crisis is very simple in a country like Australia. So that worked in our favor here.
Okay, I gotcha. So 18 is, again, not a one that we're probably happy to hear, but extreme weather events will be occurring more frequently.
Exactly. So I can't possibly make the claim that we will see a severe weather event in Australia in 2022. But I know that it is statistically more likely.
Sure.
So I think that's something, that prediction I will be writing in every, prediction column that I'll be writing over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I can just copy paste that one because as we, move into hotter climates, into, climate change territory, severe weather events will be more frequent. So we need to be smart in preparing for this. All this talk about, avoiding climate change is all well and good. And of course, we need to make sure that we have, clean energy and all these things. They're definitely true. But we need to prepare for the hard reality of Australia becoming hotter, for Australia being more prone for bushfires, for more severe weather events, even stuff like tropical cyclones in Queensland will be more statistically likely. So that means we need to do stuff, very, very unsexy stuff, like making sure that the building code in Queensland is up to scratch. If you have poorly build buildings, you will have a big damage if a cyclone goes through. If you update your building codes, if you update your housing stock bit by bit, you'll be just fine. And my friends at the BOM, at the Bureau of Meteorology, I talk to them about this kind of stuff. And they say it's a catastrophe that there isn't enough done, because they know what's going to happen eventually. Nobody can tell you really when, but it will happen eventually. And it's also stuff like we mustn't be surprised if there's a new big fat bushfire. That means we need to invest heavily into firefighting airplanes. Apparently we don't have enough of those, and apparently traditionally we share our firefighting airplanes with the Californians. But now that the bushfire seasons, they get longer in California, they get longer in Australia, and so now they overlap. So that means this sharing arrangement between bushfire or firefighting airplanes doesn't work. So we need to invest more into those things. I assume they are expensive to buy and to maintain, but these are costs that we need to bear, because we can be sure as hell that this stuff will happen eventually.
Yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer, and unless we take some massive change, you'll definitely be copying and pasting that one into the end of this year's predictions for sure. So number 19, prediction 19, the older generations join the young in demanding better digital services.
Yeah, so what I mean here is that behavior changed during COVID. We educated more people to do certain things. The reason why, when I talked earlier about more online retail taking place, is that lots of old folks or older folks for the first time purchase stuff on Amazon, for the first time purchase their groceries on the Woolies or Coles apps, and so on. And some of those newly learned behaviors
QR
will
codes.
stick.
Yeah.
And that's what we taught more and more people. Everyone had a smartphone already, because it's the only phone that people tend to buy these days, or that because, you need to Skype or WhatsApp or FaceTime with your grandkids. So grandpa has a cell phone, but now everybody learned how to scan a QR code, so that's a new digital skill that everyone has.
Yeah.
Even the COVID Safe app, the useless COVID Safe app, might have been good for something, because people learned how to download an app. So don't underestimate those simple skills that we taught at least some of the digital laggards. So we will see the demand, even among the older cohorts, for digital services increase as a result of these newly acquired skills.
Do you mean sort of like easier to use for them?
It's not necessarily easier to use. It's the idea that you demand that digital stuff is available.
It's available. Okay. Gotcha.
So
cool.
the bar has been raised for everyone. If your company has an old-fashioned website, doesn't have a website, doesn't have a digital booking system, you need to call people or whatever. These things are increasingly going to be, they already were being viewed critically by the millennials and Gen Zs, but they're now going to be viewed very critically by their parents, the baby boomers as well.
I get you now. Okay, that makes much more sense. So number 20, we're almost there. Number 20, the death of the wallet.
Yeah, so the idea there is that, cashless payments, everyone now managed to get their credit card, accessible on their phone. People pay tap and go. People pay with their phone. It's very easy to go through a day without a wallet, just with your phone. Digital ID isn't there just quite yet, but we're thinking that we are moving towards this, because
just around the corner, yeah.
And so I think you could, if you really wanted to do so, you could go through 2022 without carrying a wallet. I accidentally recently traveled to New South Wales. I live in Victoria, and I traveled to New South Wales and to South Australia on 2 occasions without a wallet, and I was just fine. It's just little stuff. Even on the border check, I had my wife text me a photo of the ID. So that was, my version of a digital ID that actually worked. So that was okay. So you do see that people are getting more flexible, more accustomed to that. And the only thing where I ran into a problem is that when you, at a hotel, when you have to scan your credit card at the start, so if you trash the hotel room or you raid the minibar, then yes, they can charge it back to your card. That didn't work with the phone credit card, because they had to physically scan it through a machine, because they didn't have a tap and go. And so, that is just a sign that the hotel that shall not be named wasn't up to date with their technology.
I was going to say, this is starting to sound like a personal story, Simon. You going around trashing hotel rooms.
I'm quite a demographer rock star. That's how I consider myself.
Oh, I love that. Number 21, early 2022 sees the return of migration.
Yeah, so everyone is getting ready for the new semester at the unis. We'll let international students in. Not quite sure about the numbers yet, but it will be much higher than it was last year. So that will slowly revitalize the inner city rental market. It will revitalize the inner city hospitality segment and provide a general boost to the economy. So that's all good news stories here. And we will then see every industry group that you can think of championing, arguing that their skill shortages should be fixed through the skilled migration list as well. So we will be seeing more people into the country in 2022. Hopefully this year might even see positive migration figures. They won't be pre-pandemic figures, but we will see migration ticking up again.
Okay, so not pre-pandemic levels, but definitely better than what we've had in the last couple of years. So number 22 is a nice positive one to end on. We will remain an optimistic and forward-looking nation.
Yeah, absolutely. The Australian mindset is actually very forgiving in terms of past horrors. If a country town gets burnt down, you shake off the dust and you rebuild. You move on. And that is what the Australian mindset does. It is a forward-looking country. You have those two. It's on every citizenship test. You have those two countries on the emblem that the two animals that can only run forward. That is the Australian mindset. The emu and the kangaroo. They can't work backwards. It's a forward-looking nation. It's a nation that is trying to get ahead. And it requires optimism in a tough country. You can say this might be historically driven by, if you first, were part of the first settlers to Australia, you didn't go back to wherever you originally came from. This was it. You had to look forward. There was no point in looking back. And I do still think that this is in the Australian psyche somewhere. So I do really believe that Australians are uniquely positioned to be moving forward after a crisis, and to not be worrying too much about what happened in the past. Sometimes this can be a negative in that we are not acknowledging past sins, if you will, but in the pandemic context, I do think this will actually serve us extremely well.
Yeah, if there's anything we've kind of learnt from this pandemic is how to be resilient. I think we can all add that to our resumes at this point. Well, there you have it. That's Simon's 22 predictions for 2022. Now, Simon, seeing as you can speak on such a broad range of topics, we'll definitely have to have you back again, especially towards the end of the year. We'll recount these predictions, and of course, we'll have to do these 23 predictions for 2023 if you're up for that challenge.
Always.
So, Simon, I'll link in our show notes where people can learn more about you. But thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. I know you're a very busy man, but I really do appreciate you talking to me today.
It's been a delight. Absolute pleasure.
Guys, once again, thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of Simon's predictions. I'll make sure to chat with him again towards the end of the year to see how close he got, and of course, based on his research and data, to see what 2023 holds. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, please share it with your friends and your family, and subscribe if you want to be notified when any of our other episodes drop. If you want to know any more about Simon and any of the work he does, you can find him on LinkedIn. A link to that and a link to the 22 predictions for 2022 article you can find in our show notes. If you want to know any more about us here at The Property Mentors, you can visit our website, thepropertymentors.com.au, and you can find and connect with us on any of our socials, which are also linked in our show notes. Tune in next week as Luke will be back and we'll be talking all about rent vesting. Until then, thank you so much again, and I'll be in your ears again next week.